welcome everybody to this session. We're going to take a look at attacking some of the biggest challenges in data analytics. And we're talking about the software expert BI. So some of the key takeaways from today is first that we look at automating any mundane and repetitive, boring tasks using automation and free up more time for value-adding activities. Secondly, we look at minimizing the risk, such as key personnel risk, and improve the quality of data for decision-making. And third out, we also look at the talents and also the flexibility of infrastructure and also how to avoid any lock-ins. So we are here from the company BI Builders, and we are behind the software expert BI. It is our mission to help companies to accelerate the journey to become more data-driven. And I'm Terje for Norway, CTO of BI Builders, and I'm here together with my colleague Anja.
Hi, I'm Anja. I'm one of the co-founders of BI Builders, and I'm very happy to be here today presenting for you this interesting topic.
Great. And then as a starting point, what is actually data automation? Isn't that something everyone is doing right now? What are the differences between when you talk about automation and others do it? What would you say, Anja?
Yeah, this is an interesting discussion topic. Everybody's automating now, right? What we've been looking at is looking at the different maturities of automation. Because automation can be many levels. It can be just repeating something over and over, and you can call that automation, right? So if you're used to copy-pasting from something from Excel to a different Excel sheet, and you then use an ETL tool to copy that data for you, you can say you have automated that task, right? I would then say you're on the level 2 here of the automation. If you then have a process around it, you build a framework around it to actually accelerate that first task, then that's the 3rd level of automation. Then you have this 4th level of automation where you actually have a software that is automating that ETL process. So you have different levels.
Different levels of maturity of automation. And let's take some kind of cases here, because this is a late day on Friday, and let's say that I'm representing a typical customer. They could be any kind of company, some kind of import-export company, whatever they do, and they have some certain challenges. And let's take a look at some of the key challenges that we typically hear a lot about. The first one is data availability. So data is typically residing in different silos across the organization. It's really hard to make it available to the right people in the right form at the right time. So what is your take on that, Anja?
Yeah, so what you would want, right, in an ideal world was to have something, a software that could make it cost-effective, productive, and agile when you're developing your data platform and developing data for everybody.
Yeah, and that sounds intuitively smart. And then one of the other challenges that I have is, of course, how do I quality assure the data? And typically, how can I do that process once and not having to repeat it for every kind of report, every kind of visualization, and every kind of use case that I have?
Exactly. Data quality, as we get more data, data quality is even more important. You would want standardization, you would want testing, and above all, governance of your data.
Okay, and I think the last concern that I hear a lot about these days is really, really hard to get hold of sufficiently number of people that are high performers, high talents, especially within data engineering space. So it's hard to attract the people, and it's hard to retain them, to keep them. And what is your take on that?
Yes, so what you could do, you could say, can I work smarter so that I don't need that many people? Using automation, for example. So that is one thing Expert BI could also do. But in additionally, you could also say, I want those people to have more valuable work, more motivating work than working on repetitive tasks. So I think we should dive a little bit more into these 3 topics.
Okay, great.
In terms of data availability, which is the challenge, it can be both the challenge that your data is residing everywhere or it's in silos, but it's not available for the right people at the right time. Productivity in preparing data is crucial to actually get your data available, right?
Right. And I think from my perspective, okay, we have data in a lot of different Excel sheets, and so this is absolutely an interesting challenge. But also, when I look at it, we have new ERP system upgrades. We have right now we're adding a new CRM system, and we really think about we should change a lot of things all the time. And that's one of my biggest concern is that the backlogs keep on growing. And people are really hammering us with change requests all the time, and my IT department is just like, stop.
Yes, so a data platform or a data warehouse is never finished. The only constant is change. That's what we're saying all the time, right? So you need to prepare for change and being agile on what you're doing. So your data destination could change, your strategy could change, your data sources changes all the time, especially now when things are moving to the cloud. So you need something that can help you handle that change, and automation can do that for you.
Makes sense. And I think also the cost perspective, since moving into the cloud gains a lot of flexibility and kind of perhaps simplicity in ways of administration, but it also adds some uncertainty in terms of what are the costs associated with this, and how can I get predictability. And that's really a challenge, and I see the costs rising like this, and I'm constantly asked, how can I cut the costs?
Exactly, and to be able to test the different cost or price performance, you actually need to use your data and test it, right? Because you can't go to the vendor and expect them to say, how much this is going to cost you, how much will this Snowflake cost me, how much will Databricks cost me, or should I use Synapse, or what should I do, what will be the price? Nobody can tell you, right? So what you need to do is you need to have a tool where it's easy for you to test this, where it's easy for you to deploy data anywhere without actually having to do all the work every time. So I think that is something about data availability. So let's move into the next challenge that you were looking at with data quality. One important part of quality is standardization. And I have been talking with a lot of you people out here, both yesterday and today, and standardization is something that everybody is looking at now. But should you trust your people to standardize, or should they have a tool to help them also standardize? So it's not just up to one person to make the right choice, but it's more of a tool-based standard.
So can I ask you, because in our development department, we have coding standards, we have migration standards, we have lots of different tools and scripts all over the place. And it's really hard sometimes to enforce the people to use those kind of standards. And what is different with this kind of approach?
Yeah, so you can look at standards on different levels. So one type of level is, say you have a standard architecture. And most of you probably have that. So you have maybe a landing zone, a kind of transform business logic type of zone, and then a front or end user zone. Well, that is also what Expert BI does. It's not, we don't invent a new standard. We just use the standards that are there, but we enforce it and we encourage it through the product.
Okay, great.
And also with that standard is testing. Testing is often ignored, or I wouldn't say ignored, not prioritized, because who's paying for it, right? The developer, when they're estimating how much time they're going to spend on a task, they mean how much time does it take to program it. They don't mean how much time does it take to test and deploy it. So having automated testing, having some good quality assurances built in is super valuable. The third part is documentation.
And can I ask about that? Because it's always a pain to do documentation of any kind of data mart that we're building, any process, and also the different types of people that need documentation. We need it for change management, We need for governance perspectives, who is owning the data, who is responsible, data stewards, and GDPR, Solvency II, and any kind of regulatory requirements. But also for the end users that really want to understand what is this, and they want to build a Power BI report, and they want to use the right kind of data for the right purpose, and also understand how where it's coming from.
Exactly, and the data literacy part is a whole subject of itself. But in terms of documentation, you want your documentation to be automated. You want it to be both for the developer and for the end user. And that's a difficult thing to accomplish. So with Expert BI, we have two interfaces. One is the developer interface. It's an application. You use that, you get column lineage end to end. You can comment everything and every change you're making. But for the end user, it's simplified. So it's more focused on reports, on descriptions. What is this graph? What is this data set? And to make the same documentation for everybody, it's just kind of filtered.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so the next thing that we're looking at from all over the place, why we're all here, right? We need competency, right? So what we want is for everybody to work with motivating work and be as productive as possible. And productive for who, right?
Yeah, and what is really productivity? Because we're using Databricks, using Azure Data Factory, lots of different tools, and those are great. But what is the difference here?
Yeah, so the difference is that you're working on a higher level of abstraction. So I can, in a few clicks, import data from my SAP system and put them into an Azure database with a few clicks. And then I can hit another button saying, publish that to Azure Data Factory. Now my data is ready to use. I can start transforming it. So I'm more productive in getting the data into the database. There's also a lot more. For example, I'm building all of my code. I've ended up with a star schema. It has 3 fact tables and 20 dimensions. But some of it is quite complicated logic, and it builds on a tree on top of each other. How do I know, should this run first? Well, I don't have to think about that, because the tool will do it. The only thing I need to think about is, did I meet the business need? Does this model actually answer the questions that the business have? That's what makes it more motivating for me to work with and more productive.
Okay. I think it could be interesting now to also take a more in-depth look at the tool itself, the kind of the platform that we have. And that's what we've seen so far is that Expert BI is a tool that can help you to get access to the data and also quality assure it. And thirdly, then also help you motivate your people that more exciting and interesting work. And I think just to add to that, also that the BI developers and say working with Tableau, Power BI, and whatever tool, that they have more time for the analytics and getting faster from raw data up to actually working with a business value generation.
Exactly. And the core of it all is the metadata engine. You do want your metadata to be stored in a central repository, and it can be used for so many cool things and so many productive things. So with Expert BI, it will gather metadata from all of the layers that you can see here. There are different modules, but all the metadata is stored in the same repository, and it's used for automation and documentation, tagging and control, and you have the end-to-end picture. So what we're actually doing, we're gathering metadata from all the processing jobs, from all the databases that you have in your solution, and also we can synchronize analysis services, cubes or tabular models, metadata from Power BI. Because Power BI has this API that you can actually get metadata from, and if you also have the underlying data, you can get that lineage end to end.
And a question to that, because this is a visualization kind of path, and Power BI is interesting because people can build so many different assets inside that tool, and data marts and so on, and how can that be documented, and kind of if you have changes?
Exactly. So it's not only automating the the technical documentation itself, but you also have an interface where you can add your descriptions. And that's maybe what the users want, right? You have so many published reports. What are they exactly? Do I actually have to open every report to see, is this the data that I need? Is this the data set that I need? But you can document the data sets, the reports, even like measures in the report. So it will be useful for the end user as well. So it's not just for the developer. And I want to talk a little bit about the different storage components that we have here. So Expert BI originated from SQL Server data warehousing. So it's a SQL Server data warehousing automation tool. Well, we see our customers are growing more. They are growing out of this. So they want more, the same features, but on different types of storage. And so we've expanded, right, into new storage platforms, into the cloud, obviously. And the different storage platforms have different availabilities of metadata, which is our gold. Metadata is gold. So if you can get the metadata, then you can do almost anything. So for example, if you're on a SQL-based storage, for example, SQL Server or Synapse dedicated SQL pool, Expert BI will then get all the SQL code as well to enable that end-to-end lineage, even though you're writing the code on your own. Because that is also where some of the traditional ETL tools fails with lineage, is if some developer doesn't like the drag and drop feature, so they write their own code. Well, this is enabled for that, because that's what the developer wants to do. For Data Lake and for Snowflake and the other, it can be a super efficient extract and ingest. So you can move the data very efficient and then start working with your business logic. That's where you want to work. Yes.
Right, and moving upwards into the stack, there's also a lot of flexibility around full code, no code, low code, different approaches. I think the interesting thing that you mentioned is that we can always maintain the metadata. So we accommodate for a lot of different methodologies and ways of working, but it's still a guided experience for the data engineer.
Maybe you can also explain a little bit about the data governance aspect of it. Yeah.
So data governance is kind of the key of controlling who is owning the data, what can you do with the data, and what is the context and where it's coming from and how is it managed. So that is an extremely important part of operationalizing kind of the data warehouse or the data platform and making sure that it's used correctly. So we have then, based on the lineage you talked about, the dependencies of all the objects based on SQL code. All that dependencies, that is kept here, and you can actually trace it end to end. From data sources, whatever that is, through all the different technologies you see here. And there's quite a wide range of them. And then through all the way up to any kind of assets you have in reports, visualizations in Power BI.
And tagging?
Yeah, and tagging is interesting because you can actually add small tags to the data at any place and track that, say GDPR, sensitive data, or data ownerships, stewards, and also any other kind of solvency or other kind of.
Yes, and it's the metadata engine that is around everything that enables all of this. So.
And perhaps.
You want to go back? One more thing?
One more thing.
Is that okay?
So we just talked about a lot about data ops and testing and making the collaboration better between the IT and the business. And I think that's a part where technology should support really the organization and help them be better at talking together and kind of automating as much as possible, and also enabling unit testing and all the things you need for migration and optimizations and so on. So I think with that, I think it's late Friday now, and
thank you all for staying.
Yeah, so late.
Staying awake.
Yeah, staying awake. Yeah,
yeah, that's great, and I wish you all a great weekend, and thank you so much for listening in.
Great.